The wind spoke of things lost. It whistled through the bones of the ruined colony, dragging the scent of scorched metal and crumbled stone across the flattened fields. What once rose proud from this red earth now lay broken and swallowed by dust. Tall towers had collapsed into jagged scars. Hollow shells of homes leaned at odd angles. A flagpole still stood in the center square, bent, blackened, and empty. Only the silence remained loyal. Nico Halden moved through the debris like a man searching for ghosts. He had stopped counting the days. The sun never looked different anymore. Just the same pale light slanting through the ruin's throat. The same wind scraping over concrete, whispering through glassless windows. He carried a pack on his shoulder, worn tools strapped to his back. His clothes were patched in layers marked by ash, oil, and time. Each step crunched softly. He scanned the ruins not for survivors. He'd long stopped hoping for that, but for structure. Anything that could hold, anything left standing. His boots found a path where children had once drawn hopscotch grids in chalk. The white marks were faint now, half erased by rain and ash. He didn't let his eyes linger. But today, there was something different. A sound, nearly drowned beneath the wind, a soft, muffled whimper. He froze. Nico adjusted the strap of his pack, lowered to one knee, and listened. There, again, a quiet sob coming from beneath a collapsed section of wall. He moved closer, heart picking up. He knew better than to hope, but the sound had weight, real. He approached carefully, eyeing the precarious angle of the rubble. The wall had once been part of a residential complex, Tier 4 housing, by the layout. He slipped between two fallen beams and crouched low. One stone shifted under his hand. Dust fell. The structure creaked. One wrong move, and it would collapse entirely. He held still, breath shallow. Then he saw them. Tucked into a hollow beneath what had once been a kitchen floor was a small cavity, barely big enough to fit a mattress. In that narrow space, pressed together, were three figures. The children came into view first. The girl, perhaps 6, had deep black hair that fell in tangled waves down her back. Her skin was a soft, dusky blue, marked with faint lines of a silver pigment that ran from temple to chin. Ritual markings, maybe. Her wide eyes shimmered like liquid onyx, locked onto him with fearful intensity. Beside her sat a younger boy, no older than 3. He clutched a cracked mug to his chest as if it were a shield. His skin matched his sister's, though fainter, like watercolor left in the rain. His lower lip trembled. Then came the mother. She moved quickly, without a sound, placing herself between them and Nico. Her eyes were the same deep black as her daughter's, but sharper, older, tired in a way that went beyond exhaustion. Her hair, black as deep space, fell to her waist in tangled waves. Dust clung to the strands and a long gash ran down her arm, partially healed but angry and red. Her body was lean, hardened from hunger, but her stance was unyielding. She didn't speak. She simply stared at him, gaze piercing. Alien, but not strange. Beautiful, but distant. Nico didn't move. He reached into his pack slowly and pulled out a sealed ration bar and a silver-wrapped thermal blanket. He laid them on the stone a few feet from the hollow, then stood, backing away. The woman didn't move, didn't blink. But the boy peeked around her hip, watched him. Nico met his gaze and gave the barest of nods, then turned and left. He didn't sleep that night. The shelter he'd built for himself, nestled into the remains of the colony's old communication outpost, felt colder than usual. He stared at the blank screen of a salvaged terminal, its cracked display flickering with ghost signals. White noise from an empty sky. No one was coming back. They had all fled 3 months ago, evacuated after the orbital bombardment from the Karit fleet left most of the colony in ruins. No warning, no negotiation. 1 minute, a trade world filled with humans and off-worlders alike. The next, a graveyard. The council had prioritized extraction for military assets, key personnel, and families of command. Nico, a colony architect and infrastructure engineer, was deemed non-essential. They hadn't even radioed him. He'd refused to abandon the central systems, still trying to stabilize the water supply grid when the dropships lifted off. By the time he reached the spaceport, it was ash. And so, he stayed. Not because he thought anyone would come back, but because someone should. The next morning, Nico returned to the ruins where he'd found them. The children were gone from sight, but he felt them watching, quiet eyes behind broken stone. He brought tools this time, a pry bar, a small hammer, salvaged wiring, and some sheet metal. The outer structure of the ruined home was surprisingly intact. With effort, it could become a shelter again. Not perfect, but better than a hole in the ground. He got to work. Stone by stone, he cleared debris, reinforced the front with salvaged beams, shifted the angle of a collapsed archway so it leaned inward instead of crushing down. His hands bled from the work, but he didn't stop. By midday, the sunlight streamed directly into the hollow. And that's when she appeared again. Elira. She stepped out of the shadows, still wary, still silent. But her eyes scanned his work, not with suspicion, but calculation. She watched the structure taking shape, the stones arranged for warmth, the roof angled to catch wind, not collapse beneath it. Then softly she spoke. "You build with your hands." He looked up, surprised. Her voice was low, smooth, and laced with an accent that made the words sound musical. "Hands are what I've got," he said. Her gaze drifted to his bleeding palms. "I'll help," she said. She crossed the rubble without hesitation and picked up a smaller beam. Despite her slight frame, she moved with practiced strength, someone who'd built before, or rebuilt. They worked in silence. Later, when the heat faded and shadows grew long, the children crept out from hiding. The girl carried something in her arms, a cloth bundle. She knelt beside a crumbled wall, opened the cloth, and revealed crushed berries, purple and blue and red. She dipped her fingers in the juice and began smearing it along the wall's inner curve. Swirls, stars, comets and spirals. "My name is Lina," she said without looking up. "These are the dreams Mama told me about, before they burned." Her little brother joined her, dipping his tiny fingers into the pulp. "Stars won't be mad," he said solemnly. "They're lonely too." Nico knelt beside them, watching the shapes take form. The berry stains dried quickly under the sun, leaving faint, fragile constellations. The girl looked up at him. "Mama said stars don't fall, but I think ours did. And it landed on us." He had no answer. Elira approached then, her face softer, though still guarded. "You didn't have to come back," she said. "No," he agreed. "I didn't." "Why did you?" Nico's eyes flicked to the children, to the stars painted in pulp and dust. "Because someone should." She watched him for a long time. Then she reached into her satchel and pulled out a piece of fabric, hand-woven, frayed but beautiful. She handed it to him without a word. "For your hands," she said. He wrapped it carefully around his palm. It smelled faintly of smoke and something floral beneath it. "I'm Nico Halden," he said, voice low. "I used to build cities. Now I build walls so the wind won't steal what's left." She looked at him and something shifted in her face. "I'm Elira. My children are Lina and Kale. This place, this ruin, was never our world. We fled to it, and then it burned like all the others." There was silence again. A heavy silence. Then Lina's voice, quiet from behind them. "If he stays, maybe we can dream again." The stars above flickered in the dusk, cold and distant. But the ones on the wall glowed faintly in the fading light, painted with juice and small, desperate hope. And Nico, for the first time in months, let himself believe they might not be alone forever. He wasn't here to mourn anymore. He was here to rebuild. By the time the second morning light stretched across the ruins, painting long golden lines over the broken stone and ash-swept ground, the shelter had begun to take shape. Not finished, not safe, but promising. It looked less like a grave and more like the idea of a home, still clinging to the memory of what warmth once meant. Nico Halden sat just beyond the structure's edge, sharpening the edge of a salvaged tool against a flat stone. His fingers were stiff from yesterday's labor, skin rubbed raw where the cloth Elira had given him hadn't covered. He worked in silence, though his mind refused the same courtesy. The girl's words from the night before lingered in his head like a splinter. "If he stays, maybe we can dream again." He didn't know what he had given them, not really. A shelter, safety, hope. But he knew what they had given him, a reason. He looked up as movement stirred within the shelter. Elira stepped out first, her long black hair catching the breeze. The faint silver patterns along her temples shimmered in the light, almost hidden beneath a layer of dust. She wore the same threadbare fabric as before, but she moved with more purpose now, less guarded, though still cautious. Behind her, the children emerged. Lina's face lit up at the sight of the rising sun, and Kale clung to his sister's hand, eyes still bleary from sleep. Both children had their mother's dusky blue skin and deep black eyes, but in the daylight their differences showed. Lena's gaze was thoughtful, always watching. Kale still hadn't spoken more than a few words. But when he looked at Nico, there was no fear, just quiet curiosity. Alira crossed the space between them with calm steps and stopped beside the stones Nico had gathered. She crouched and ran her fingers across a jagged slab, testing its weight, then gave a single nod. "I can brace that side," she said without prompting. "The angle's wrong. We should anchor it with a joint beam, something wide enough to catch both walls." Nico blinked at her, surprised by the precision in her voice. "You know structure?" he asked. Alira glanced sideways, not quite a smile, but not cold either. "Before the war, I was a void architect. I designed ships, houses, places for people to live without gravity tearing them apart." He nodded slowly. "Good. You can see things I don't." "We'll both see things," she said, reaching for the beam. They worked side by side. It wasn't effortless. Stones were heavy, hands were blistered, but it was rhythmic, shared. They didn't speak often, but they didn't need to. When one paused to adjust footing, the other held weight. When Nico's back tensed from strain, Alira handed him a water flask without a word. When a stone nearly slipped from his grip, she steadied it. By midday, the eastern wall stood with support. It cast a long shadow over the place where the children had made their star paintings. Some had faded in the sun, but Lina and Kale had returned to them, dabbing juice from freshly crushed berries with careful hands. Kale leaned forward, painting small circles beside his sister's larger shapes. Nico approached, wiping sweat from his brow. "What are those?" he asked. "Moons," Kale whispered, barely audible. Lina didn't look up. "He talks more when it's quiet." Nico crouched beside them, watching the boy smear color across stone with short, deliberate strokes. "You like moons?" Nico asked gently. Kale nodded once. "They don't fall," he said. "They stay." Lina looked at Nico then, sharp, perceptive. "You stayed too." He didn't know what to say to that, not right away. He sat back on his heels, letting the silence settle between them. The wind picked up, stirring the dust. "Everyone else left," Lina continued. "When the sky broke, they ran. Papa tried to fight. Mama screamed. The lights came down from the clouds and made everything hot and white." Nico lowered his gaze. He remembered that light too. "We were in a cave," Lina went on. "He told us to stay still. He went out. He didn't come back." Kale clutched her arm tighter. Alira was nearby, her back to them, listening as she sorted materials into makeshift piles. But her hands had stilled. Nico swallowed hard, throat tight. "I'm sorry." Lina gave a little shrug, far too old for her 6 years. "Me too." He turned to Kale. "Did you see what happened?" The boy didn't answer, but after a long pause, he looked up and whispered, "Sky took him." The breeze caught the cloth of the shelter, and for a moment, it flapped like a sail trying to remember wind. Alira stood then, walking over. Her eyes found Nico's, guarded again, but not distant. "The Karit came for the communication towers," she said quietly. "They didn't want negotiation. They wanted silence. My people were only supposed to be temporary settlers. We never meant to stay long. But the council used our cities, our tech, our orbit lines. They made us a target." "You were a refugee?" Nico asked. Alira gave a slight nod. "From 3 wars ago. My world was glassed before I turned 20. We've been running ever since, until this colony said we were welcome." She smiled bitterly. "And then the sky burned again." Nico felt the weight of her words settle in his chest. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small object, charred, half-melted, and no longer functional. A data tag. He set it gently beside her. "I was assigned here to build bridges, literal ones, connect sectors, link comm lines, help turn this patch of dust into a home." Alira picked up the tag, studied it. "You stayed," she said again. "I couldn't leave," he said softly. "Not when I saw what was left. Not when the last dropship closed its doors and screamed into the sky while I was still pulling power from a broken relay. I thought, maybe I could fix something, even if no one else came back." "And now you're fixing us," she said. Nico didn't respond, but the look in her eyes was different now. Not soft, not romantic, not yet, but something was beginning. That night, the wind calmed for the first time in weeks. The stars came out, sharp and clear above the broken land. Lina lay curled in a blanket near the painted wall, humming softly to herself. Kale slept with one arm wrapped around a bundle of berries. Nico sat outside, legs stretched, back against stone. The fire between them flickered low. Alira approached and handed him a cup of warm water, faintly bitter with herbs. "They help with pain," she said. He took it. "Thank you." She sat beside him, close but not touching. "They're different with you," she said after a pause. "Less afraid, like they believe in something again." "I'm not a hero, Alira." "No," she said quietly. "You're better." She didn't elaborate. Instead, she leaned back and looked at the sky. The moons were full, 2 of them tonight. One pale and steady, the other ringed in soft amber. "They stayed," Kale had said. Nico looked too. And in that moment, between broken stones and starlight, he began to understand what it meant to be the one who stays when everyone else runs. He wasn't here to survive. He was here to build something that could survive without him. He didn't know what that would look like yet. But it might start with 4 people in the ruins, painting stars and remembering how to dream. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. The days passed not with the ticking of clocks, but with the shifting of light on ruined stone. Morning arrived with a slow golden swell, warming the eastern wall of their shelter, still unfinished, but holding. The nights came with cold wind and silence, broken only by the sound of fire crackling low and the quiet breaths of children asleep. Nico Halden had started to measure time differently, not by days, but by what they built. A braced beam here, a sealed roof corner there. The slow creation of something livable, something stubbornly permanent in a world that had lost everything. And more than that, by the moments that couldn't be measured with tools or stones. Like how Alira no longer waited for him to initiate conversation, how Kale had stopped hiding behind his sister, or how Lina had named the half-sheltered alcove they painted in. The dream room. "This is where the stars come down," she said matter-of-factly, smearing purple berry paste onto the wall. "So they don't forget we're still here." Nico had smiled at that, quietly moved. He didn't ask her why she thought stars forgot things. Some pain was better left as poetry. They were rebuilding the outer supports that morning, Alira adjusting a salvage beam while Nico held it steady. The wind had picked up, stirring ash across the rubble like ghosts not ready to leave. "I watched them leave," Alira said, tightening a strip of old wire around the post. "The human ships, so many of them, all shining, all full." Nico glanced at her, silent. "They took the ones with rank first," she went on. "Then the technicians. Then whoever still had family off-world. I asked for passage for my children." Her hands stilled. "They told me there was no space left." Her voice didn't shake. She wasn't telling him this to gain pity, just offering truth. "They told me I wasn't a citizen, that my species was on the provisional list, that I was fortunate even to be housed here, in the outer sectors. I begged. They closed the doors." Nico tightened the beam against the joint, not looking at her. "I was 10 minutes late to the final launch," he said. "I'd stayed back to restore the water flow to the shelters in Quadrant B. We had families still trapped underground, dehydration setting in fast. I thought, if I could get the pumps running, they might make it in time." "Did they?" He shook his head. "I never found out. When I reached the pad, the last ship was already lifting off. I could see the heat trails." They stood in silence for a moment, wind brushing against them like breath. Then Alira turned toward him. "You could have run, found a way out." "I didn't want to leave a place broken," Nico said simply, "not without trying." He looked up then, and for a moment they held each other's gaze. There was no need for more words. Later that day, Lina tugged at Nico's arm while he sorted through salvaged paneling. "Come see," she said with bright urgency. He followed her to the dream room. The berry murals had grown since last he saw them. Sprawling constellations smeared across the wall, ringed by childlike depictions of moons and stars. She pointed to a new section, a swirling pattern of stars arranged in a spiral, framed by stick figures standing underneath them. One of the figures had a square head, scrawled with black soot to resemble stubble. "That's you," she said proudly. Nico squinted, amused. "You gave me a beard?" Lina giggled. "You look like a tired bear, but a nice one." Kale toddled up behind them and added, "Bear man strong." The boy offered Nico a small lopsided stone with a smear of blue across its side. "For the wall," he said. "It's strong like Mama." Nico knelt and took the stone gently, placing it into the gap in the shelter wall they'd left for just such things. He pressed it in with care, as though it were sacred. Then Alira appeared at his side, holding something in her hands, a folded piece of deep indigo cloth, frayed at the edges but beautifully woven. She extended it toward him without ceremony. He hesitated, then took it. "What is it?" he asked. "A comfort wrap. From my mother. Worn during mourning, but also during healing." He unfolded it slowly. The center of the fabric had a stitched spiral, similar to Lina's mural, surrounded by soft lines like rays of light. He didn't need to ask what it meant. "I want you to have it," she said. Nico looked up at her, searching her face. "Why?" Alira tilted her head, her voice lower now. "Because you stayed, because you didn't look at us like burdens, and because—" She paused, her fingers curling slightly against her palm. "It feels wrong to keep mourning alone." He didn't speak for a long time. Then he carefully folded the cloth again and tucked it into his pack, right beside his tools, close to where he kept the small trinkets he'd never parted with. "I'll take care of it," he said. Their eyes met again, this time with something gentler between them, something neither of them tried to name. That night, the children curled beneath a salvaged tarp, Kale snoring softly and Lina humming a lullaby only half remembered. The fire burned low. Nico sat near it, shoulders aching, muscles tight from a day of lifting. Alira joined him, handing him a cup of warm broth steeped in roots and herbs. They didn't speak at first. The silence between them had become comfortable, less like a void, and more like the space where something unspoken lived. But then she asked, so softly he almost didn't hear her, "Did you lose someone?" Nico didn't look at her right away. He stared into the fire, watching the orange light flicker on cracked stone. "Yes," he said finally. "A brother. Back on Earth. He was always the brave one. Joined the Defense Corps before I could convince him to stay behind. We argued the night before he left. I told him I hated him for leaving. He smiled, said he'd bring me something from the outer moons." He rubbed his hands together, voice lower. "He died in the Karidi siege. I got the message 3 weeks later. No body, just coordinates." "I'm sorry," Alira said. "So am I." She reached over and rested her hand lightly on his. It was the first time she'd touched him deliberately. He didn't pull away. Their hands stayed like that, quiet against the stone, warmed by firelight. Above them, the sky stretched wide and dark and full of watching stars. They didn't speak of love, not yet. But in the way their hands met, in the painted stars on the wall, in the gift of fabric handed from one scarred heart to another, something was growing. And the shelter, once just a pile of broken rock, now felt more like a home than anything either of them had known in years. The rain came without warning. A fine mist at first, barely noticeable over the usual scent of dry stone and burnt copper that lingered in the ruins. Then, gradually, it thickened. Cool drops pattering softly on the makeshift roof Nico had patched the night before. The sound was gentle but insistent, like a memory trying to be heard again. Nico stood in the doorway of the half-completed shelter, arms crossed, gaze turned toward the horizon. He watched the clouds rolling in from the east, low, heavy, bruised with distant lightning. The sky was always dramatic here. Even its silence carried weight. Behind him, Alira moved with quiet purpose, rolling the children's sleep wraps and securing their hand-woven pouches along the inner wall. Lina sat on a flat stone by the fire, humming to herself, while Kale traced small spirals in the damp dust with a piece of charcoal. The air inside the shelter felt warm, despite the chill outside. Not from the fire alone, but from the sense that something living now occupied this place. Not just bodies, not just survival, family. Nico didn't know when that feeling had settled in. It hadn't been declared. It hadn't arrived with any grand gesture, but it was there now, as unmistakable as breath. In the way Kale would crawl into his lap without hesitation, in how Lina always looked to him first before saying anything difficult, and in the way Alira's voice had started using we instead of I when they talked about the future. They'd fought for every inch of this shelter together, stone by stone, breath by breath. But peace on this world was a brittle thing. It broke by afternoon. The sound started as a low, grinding hum, mechanical, artificial, close. Nico's head lifted immediately. He stepped outside, boots squelching in wet ash. Alira was already beside him, alert. The hum deepened. Then it roared. A small ship tore through the clouds above, low enough to rattle the crumbling towers around them. It wasn't a colony vessel. Too old, too patched together. The hull bore no markings. Scavenger tech. Ugly, improvised, hungry. Nico's jaw tightened. "They're landing," he muttered. He turned quickly. "Inside. Now." Alira didn't hesitate. She gathered Kale in her arms and ushered Lina into the shelter's deeper alcove, beneath the covered portion they'd reinforced last week. Their go bag, already prepared, was tucked in a niche near the wall. Emergency rations, water, tools. They always knew this day might come. Nico moved fast. He retrieved the pulse tool he'd modified, a blunt instrument, good for welding and emergency ignition, but with enough charge to knock a man flat if used right. He checked the capacitor, tightened the wires around the handle, and stepped outside. The ship touched down just past the perimeter wall. Dust billowed in wide, angry spirals. A minute passed, then two. Footsteps followed, not rushed, measured, intentional. Two men emerged from the swirling haze. One was tall and broad-shouldered, his armor cobbled together from mismatched parts, an old Kareet exosuit stripped of insignia. The other was lean, almost gaunt, with a blade strapped to his thigh and wild eyes that flicked from ruin to ruin. "Well, what do we have here?" the tall one called out, stopping a few meters away. His voice was casual, but his hand never strayed far from his weapon. "Looks like someone forgot to evacuate," the smaller one added with a crooked grin. Nico raised the tool slowly. "This is a private claim. You'll find nothing here but broken stone." "Oh, I think we'll find more than that," the tall one said, eyes narrowing. "Shelter, supplies, maybe even a little company." His gaze slid toward the entrance of the shelter. Nico stepped forward, placing himself directly between them and the doorway. "Turn around." The taller man laughed. "You gonna fight us with a wrench, engineer?" "No," Nico said evenly, with conviction. The wind picked up again, cutting between them like a blade. Then Alira's voice rang out, low but unmistakably clear. "He won't be alone." She stepped forward, the rain slicking her long black hair back from her face. Her blue skin glistened in the dim light, silver tattoos catching the gleam like etched starlight. She wore no armor, held no weapon. But she walked like someone who had survived war, not by chance, but by force of will. The scavengers stilled. The tall one's smirk faded. "Sanyari," he said almost under his breath. "Didn't know your kind still walked free." "We walk," Alira said calmly, "and we protect our own." "She's serious," the smaller man said, suddenly unsure. "That mark, she's not bluffing." The wind blew harder now, sending leaves and grit spiraling through the ruins. Nico held his ground. "You have 10 seconds to leave," he said. "We won't ask again." For a long moment, nothing moved. Then the tall one shrugged. "Not worth it. Let's go." "You sure?" the younger man asked, frowning. "Yeah," he muttered. "You see how he stood in front of her? That's not a man guarding a place. That's a man ready to die for it." They backed away slowly, eyes never leaving Nico and Alira. Minutes later, the ship lifted off, vanishing into the clouds. Only then did Nico lower the tool. His arms trembled slightly. Alira turned to him, eyes searching. "You would have fought them." "I will always fight to protect you," he said quietly. She nodded. "So will I." Silence stretched between them, not heavy, full. Then Lina appeared in the doorway. "They're gone?" Nico nodded. She exhaled slowly. "I wasn't scared," she said, then added, I was, but not all the way." Kale followed her, dragging a piece of scrap metal in one hand. He looked up at Nico and said, "Big man, safe." Then he handed the scrap to Alira and pointed to the wall. "Put it there." "What is it?" she asked, kneeling. He smiled shyly. "Shield." Alira touched the metal reverently and placed it in the wall's support, securing it in place. "They'll come again," she said softly. Nico nodded. "Then we'll be ready." That night, the fire burned brighter than usual, fed by extra wood scavenged from the ruins. Lina painted a new symbol on the dream room wall, a circle around a figure with outstretched arms. Stars radiated around it like protection. "That's all of us," she said, pointing. "But the circle's from Kyle. His shield." Nico sat beside Alira, Kale asleep between them, head resting on her lap. He glanced at the wall, then at her. "We stood together today." Alira nodded. "And we will tomorrow." She leaned into him, her head resting lightly on his shoulder. "I don't think I remember the last time I felt protected," she whispered. "You're not alone anymore," Nico said. "None of you are." She didn't answer with words. Instead, her hand slid into his, fingers curling between his own. Not uncertain, not cautious, just there, solid, present. Outside, the stars broke through the cloud cover one by one, no longer just distant watchers, but witnesses to something fragile, to something new, to something worth protecting. And beneath those stars, with nothing but stone, paint, and fire between them and the world, they didn't just survive the night. They claimed it, together. The evening after the threat passed was quiet, not in fear, but in stillness. The kind of silence that comes not from emptiness, but from release, from the weight of something heavy finally being lifted. For the first time in months, maybe longer, the air didn't feel tight in Nico's chest. They sat outside near the edge of the fire pit, the flames crackling low and steady. Lina curled beside Alira, half asleep with her head against her mother's leg. Cale dozed on a salvaged cushion, one small hand still clutching the piece of scrap metal he had proudly declared our shield. The stars above were sharp and clean in the sky. No clouds, no ash, just the deep black of space and the delicate glimmer of constellations painted in light. Nico leaned forward, adding a stick to the fire, watching sparks snap upward like a fleeting galaxy. Alira's voice, when it came, was soft. I never thought I'd see the stars without being afraid. He turned his head slightly, waiting. After the Karidi came, she continued, the sky became a warning. I used to dream of it. Now I only look when I have to. They took the sky from you, Nico said. She nodded. And everything under it. They sat in silence for a moment, broken only by the fire and Cale's soft, rhythmic breathing. Then Lina stirred and sat up, rubbing her eyes. Mama, she said sleepily, will you sing tonight? Alira blinked, visibly caught off guard. Lina didn't plead. She didn't beg. She just looked at her mother with the quiet weight of a child asking for something sacred. I haven't sung in a long time, Alira said, voice hushed. But you used to, Lina whispered. When Papa was still here, you used to sing to us at night. Alira lowered her gaze. I did. Please? Lina asked, crawling into her mother's lap. Just once? Cale stirred too, blinking groggily, then nestling closer to the sound of his sister's voice. Alira looked at Nico then, something unreadable flickering in her expression. Fear, perhaps, or shame, or maybe something deeper, a weight she hadn't yet found words for. Nico didn't speak. He didn't prompt her. He simply offered her the calmness in his eyes, steady and patient, permission if she needed it, or forgiveness, if that was what she feared. Alira exhaled slowly, and then, after a long pause, she began to sing. It was quiet at first, a single note, drawn like breath held too long, then another. A melody unfolded, foreign and ancient, like the voice of wind through crystal. The language was Sanyari, fluid and strange, each syllable shimmering with layered tones. The song rose in gentle waves, melodic and haunting. The notes wrapped around the ruins like vines, filling every crack, every hollow, every silent scar. Nico didn't understand the words, but the meaning struck him like heat from a fire. Grief, memory, hope. It was a song sung from the inside out. Alira's voice quivered in the beginning, uncertain, brittle with years of silence. But as she sang, her shoulders relaxed. Her voice grew fuller, stronger, like something inside her had been sleeping and now stirred to life. Lina held her mother tightly, her face pressed to her side. Cale closed his eyes and smiled in his sleep. When the final note faded, there was only the fire again, the sound of it grounding them, holding them. Alira stayed still for a long moment, her hand over her chest, breathing deep like she had just surfaced from deep water. Then she looked at Nico. I thought I had lost it, she said, barely above a whisper. The voice, the will, the right. You didn't, he said. Her eyes glistened, not with tears, but with something just as raw. You remembered it for me, she whispered. Nico moved closer, slowly, kneeling in front of her. I just reminded you who you were. Her hand reached for his, hesitant, not out of fear, but awe. Their fingers met, and the touch was warm, grounding. Her hand was calloused from work, but it trembled now, not from weakness, from release. I don't know what this is, she admitted, between us, but it makes me feel like something is possible again. It is, he said gently, because we made it that way. She leaned forward and kissed him. It was not passionate, not urgent, but full of everything unspoken between them since the day he first laid a blanket outside her shelter and walked away. Full of each look, each silent offering, every shared weight and unvoiced fear. When they pulled apart, Nico let his forehead rest against hers. "I never thought I'd find something worth staying for," he murmured, "and now I can't imagine leaving." She closed her eyes and breathed him in. Later, they sat wrapped in the comfort cloth Alira had once gifted him, now draped across both their shoulders like a banner. The children slept soundly inside. The stars above watched silently, no longer distant or menacing. "I used to think love was for before," Alira said quietly. "Before the war, before the sky burned, before the silence." "And now?" Nico asked. "Now I think it's what brought us through it." He nodded, his voice soft and certain. "I love you." Alira met his gaze. "And I love you." They didn't need more than that. They had said the hardest words. They had crossed the final silence. There was no ceremony, no vow. Just two people with their hands tangled in each other's, surrounded by stars and ash and warmth. And beneath the stars, in the heart of a ruined world, something real was born. Not from perfection, but from staying. The morning after Alira sang was brighter than any Nico could remember. It wasn't just the light, though the sky had cleared overnight, revealing a soft blue dome untouched by smoke or storm. It was something deeper. Something in the way the air moved, the way their home caught the sun and held it like it belonged there. He woke to warmth, not just from the fire or the furs, but from her. Alira was still beside him, tucked close beneath the woven wrap they'd shared the night before. Her face was relaxed in sleep, peaceful in a way he had never seen it. Her hand rested lightly over his chest, fingers curled slightly against his heartbeat. And for the first time, he didn't fear waking her. He only watched, quietly grateful, letting the moment hold him still. Lina and Kyle were already awake. He could hear their hushed voices from the far end of the shelter where morning light filtered through a crack in the southern wall. They were trying not to wake their mother. Their whispers were full of curiosity and quiet mischief. "Mama smiled in her sleep," Lina said. "She sang," Kale whispered back. "Do you think she'll do it again?" Kale didn't answer, but the hope in his silence said enough. Alira stirred, and her fingers tightened briefly against Nico's shirt. Her eyes opened slowly, and for a moment she just looked at him. Then she smiled. Small, soft, real. "Morning," he said. "Still here?" she murmured. "Always," he replied. Later that morning, they stood side by side in the sunlight, surveying the unfinished section of the shelter. There wasn't much left to do, just the final reinforcements on the western wall and a few interior joints to seal before the rains returned. But this part had been left for last for a reason. This wall had collapsed during the attack. It was where Alira's husband had fallen. They hadn't spoken of it directly, not once since the night she told Nico her children had lost their father. But she had paused every time they approached it. Not out of weakness, but respect. Grief made her careful, deliberate. Now she stepped forward without hesitation. "I'm ready," she said. Nico followed, saying nothing. He let her take the lead. She selected the first stone, ran her fingers along the edge, and placed it into the wall's open mouth. Kale and Lina helped in small ways. Kale handing up stones he'd deemed good ones, and Lina cleaning old paint off a recovered panel they planned to use for the inner wall. Even their play was quieter today, almost ceremonial. By mid-afternoon, the western wall stood tall again. Alira laid her palm on the final stone and whispered something in Sanyari. Then she stepped back and looked at Nico. "That was the wall that buried him," she said. "He tried to reach us when the sky came down. He died trying to bring us light." "He would have wanted this," Nico said quietly. "Not a grave, a shelter." She nodded. He was brave, but he didn't have time to build something new. She turned to face Nico, her voice steady. "You did." Nico didn't speak. He simply opened his arms, and she stepped into them. She didn't cry. She just leaned into him, her face against his shoulder, her arms wrapped around his back. And in the quiet, Nico knew this was not a goodbye to her past. It was her first full step into something new. That evening they gathered in the dream room. The walls were now covered in painted stars, animals, and the outlines of 4 figures standing beneath a roof. Each child had added something new today. Kale had drawn a rock with wings, and Lina had painted a large twisting vine that wrapped upward across the stone. "It's a growing home," she explained, "not just standing still." "I like that," Nico said. Alira sat beside him, legs folded, a clay bowl of steaming root broth cradled in her hands. Her head rested against his shoulder, her presence unguarded. "You know," she said softly, "when I first saw you, you didn't say anything. Just left food, a blanket, and walked away." He nodded. "I didn't know what else to do." "That was the right choice," she said. "No one had ever done that before, given without asking." Nico looked over at her. "And yet you still let me back in." She smiled faintly. "Because the children watched you, and I watched them, and their fear faded." Kale climbed into Nico's lap then, his thumb in his mouth, head already heavy with sleep. Lina crawled up next to her mother, curling under her arm. "What do we call it now?" Lina asked suddenly. "It's not just a shelter anymore." Alira looked toward the archway they had completed that morning. The place that had once been a ruin now had a doorway, framed with smooth stone and covered with a simple cloth made from stitched salvage. "A name," Alira said thoughtfully. "We already gave it one," Kale mumbled, half asleep. "Starhome," Lina grinned. He remembered. Nico looked at Alira. "It fits, doesn't it?" She nodded. "Yes, it does." She stood, walked to the doorway, and with careful hands tied a strip of blue cloth across the top beam. It fluttered gently in the breeze. "A home under stars, not watched by them, not haunted by them," she said, "but held by them." The fire inside crackled warmly, sending flickers of gold light across the walls. Nico sat back, one arm around Kale, the other reaching for Alira's hand. Their fingers laced together as naturally as breath. "I used to think survival was the end," he said, "that making it through the day was all there was." "But now you know?" Alira asked. He turned to her, his voice steady. "Now I know survival is just the beginning. What comes after? That's the miracle." She leaned her head against his, her voice so low only he could hear it. "Then let's be a miracle, Nico Halden." He kissed her knuckles, smiled, and held her close. Outside, the stars rose, clean and bright. And this time, they weren't distant gods or silent witnesses. They were part of the home itself. Painted in the walls, whispered in the songs, carved in the hands that had built something beautiful from ruin. Starhome stood, and inside it, 4 souls slept beneath a roof they had made together, hearts beating not in fear or desperation but in peace. Not just shelter, a life. The wind had softened. It no longer whispered warnings through the ruined colony, no longer howled down broken corridors or tore at the edges of tarps and cloth. Now it moved like breath, gentle, rhythmic, alive. It curled through the gaps of the rebuilt home and stirred the woven curtains that lined the open archways. The cold had lost its bite. The land, long wounded, was learning warmth again. And so were they. Nico stood just beyond the perimeter of Starhome, his hands braced on the smooth railing he had carved from salvaged beams. The overlook faced east, where the land unfurled in layers of pale green and red stone, stretching out toward the horizon. Distant mountains still bore the scars of orbital fire, black lines carved into their faces like cauterized wounds. But even there, new growth had begun to root. The world was healing, so were they. Behind him, Alira's voice drifted into the morning light. She was speaking in Sanyari, soft and melodic, teaching Kale the names of plants growing along the garden wall. Her tone was warm but patient, a quiet rhythm full of encouragement. Lina was nearby, brushing paint over a fresh stretch of wall, her small hands moving in thoughtful, deliberate strokes. Nico turned and watched them for a long moment. A family, his. Every stone beneath his feet had been laid with care. Every patch of earth they'd cultivated had been chosen together. What had once been a shattered ruin had grown into something real, solid, alive, Starhome. The name was carved now, not just into stone, but into memory. Alira had etched it above the doorway herself, using a blade passed down from her mother. Nico had added his own touch below it, a simple emblem of 4 stars in orbit around a 5th, smaller one. Lina had filled the spaces with color. The home wasn't perfect. The walls still needed reinforcement in heavy storms. The old signal dish out by the tower refused to hold calibration, despite Nico's best efforts. They had no contact with the outside world, and no guarantee they ever would. But they had each other, and that was more than enough. That afternoon, Kale found an old panel of ceramic tucked beneath the rubble near the ridge. He carried it home proudly, dragging it behind him like a prize. Elira cleaned it, Lena painted it, and Nico mounted it above the entryway. The family stood back and admired it together. The painting showed 4 figures standing beneath a canopy of stars. One tall and broad-shouldered, one slender with long black hair, 2 smaller, one holding a rock, the other a brush. Their home rose behind them, bright and warm, its edges surrounded by vines and roots. And at the very top, Lena had painted a large, brilliant star. "Is that one ours?" Cale asked. "No," Lena said seriously. "That one is for the people who come next, so they know where to find hope." Elira smiled and touched her daughter's cheek. "That's beautiful." Later that night, Nico found himself staring into the fire, his thoughts flickering with the flames. Elira was beside him, her body pressed into his, her head resting against his shoulder. Lena and Cale were asleep in their bunks, wrapped in hand-stitched blankets beneath a ceiling of painted constellations. "You're quiet," Elira murmured. He didn't look away from the fire. "I was just thinking how strange it is to feel full after feeling hollow for so long." She lifted her head to meet his eyes. "You're not hollow anymore." "No," he agreed. "I'm not." A pause. "Do you miss Earth?" she asked. He considered it. "No," he said. "Not like I thought I would. I miss things, sure. Music, the smell of city rain, my brother's old cooking pot." Elira smiled. "A cooking pot?" "He used to burn everything," Nico said, laughing softly. "It was awful. But he always said, if you ruin dinner with love, it still tastes better than something perfect made without it." She leaned into him again. "That sounds like something you'd say." He kissed the top of her head. "I think that's why I stayed." Elira shifted so she could look at him more clearly. "Why?" "Because this world may be broken. This home might not be perfect. But love grew here. Real love. Not in spite of the ruin. Because of it." She stared at him, her expression open and soft and shimmering with something fragile. "I love you, Nico Halden." His breath caught, even though he had heard her say it before. "I love you, Elira," he replied, his voice steady. "Not as a guest in your world. As your home." She kissed him, slow, certain, full of the kind of depth that only comes after choosing each other again and again. And in that kiss, in that fire-lit moment, there was no sorrow, no memory of war, just the sound of a quiet world making space for something new. When they parted, Nico whispered, "What happens next?" Elira looked toward the stars above their open roof, her expression calm. "We live," she said. "We grow. And one day, when others come, if they do, they'll see what we made here, and they'll understand." Nico followed her gaze to the night sky. "They'll know it's possible," he said. "They'll know it's worth staying for." The wind moved through the trees beyond the shelter, carrying the scent of moss and wildflowers. The garden rustled gently. The fire cracked, and above them, the stars burned, steady and bright. They didn't shine down like distant gods anymore. They watched like old friends, because something had been born beneath them. Not just a shelter, not just a survival, but a home. Star home, where love stayed, where grief was honored, and where something new had begun.